Adrian Cross thought he was the smartest man in Riverton, a criminal mastermind who could vanish without a trace, until Detective Marcus Hale, a cop with a 200 IQ, turned his arrogance into the very trap that destroyed him. The quiet city of Riverton had always been known for its calm streets, family-owned shops, and a sense of security that made people leave their doors unlocked at night. That calm was shattered on a sunny Tuesday afternoon when one of the city's most prestigious jewelry stores fell victim to a daring heist. The timing alone raised eyebrows. Robberies usually happened under the cover of night, but this thief had chosen daylight, when traffic was busy and the streets were alive with witnesses. It was bold, almost arrogant, as if the person behind it wanted everyone to know just how clever they were. When officers arrived, the scene was baffling. Millions of dollars worth of diamonds and rare gemstones were gone, but nothing about the crime made sense. The display cases weren't smashed, no alarms had gone off, and no one had seen a suspicious figure walk through the front doors. Customers inside said everything seemed normal until they heard a faint thud from the back room. By the time an employee went to check, the storage vault was empty, and the thief had disappeared without a trace. Security footage offered little help. Cameras inside the store showed a flicker of static just minutes before the robbery, as if someone had tampered with the system. The strange part was that the equipment itself hadn't been damaged. Whoever pulled this off had disabled the cameras without touching the wires or breaking into the control room. There were no fingerprints on the counters, no footprints on the tiled floor, and no sign that anyone had forced open the heavy steel vault. The lock was intact, untouched, and somehow useless. It was as if the jewels had simply evaporated into thin air. Witness reports were scattered and inconsistent. Some people swore they saw a dark-colored car speeding down the street moments after the robbery, while others insisted there had been nothing unusual at all. A few even joked that the thief must have been invisible. What unsettled the officers most was how fast everything had happened. The entire heist took less than 6 minutes, from the moment the cameras glitched to the discovery of the empty vault. It was impossible for an amateur to move with that kind of speed and precision. This was the work of someone who had studied every detail of the building, someone who knew exactly how long it would take to bypass each obstacle. The jewelry store owners were devastated. Their life's work, years of collecting and securing the finest gems, had vanished without so much as a clue. The case quickly gained headlines across the city. People whispered about a mastermind at work, a criminal who was not motivated only by money, but by the thrill of pulling off the impossible. For Riverton, the robbery was more than a loss of valuables. It was a reminder that even the safest places could be cracked open by someone clever enough to see the cracks in the system. Police scrambled for leads, but each dead end deepened the mystery. The thief had planned too carefully, leaving investigators chasing shadows. The city wanted answers, and the department needed results. It was clear this wasn't an ordinary case. What nobody realized yet was that the story of the heist was only the beginning, and the real battle would be fought in the shadows between a criminal who thought he was untouchable and a detective whose mind was sharp enough to prove otherwise. Detective Marcus Hale was not the type to be easily impressed by clever criminals. With over a decade of experience handling everything from armed robberies to financial frauds, he had developed a reputation for noticing details that others dismissed as irrelevant. Colleagues often joked that Hale didn't "I just solve cases." He unraveled puzzles that only existed in his own mind. When the Riverton jewelry heist landed on his desk, he didn't see a simple theft. He saw a challenge, and to him, challenges were opportunities to outthink whoever believed they were untouchable. From the start, Hale refused to follow the usual trail of evidence. Detectives before him had combed through the vault, dusted every inch for prints, and reviewed the surveillance footage frame by frame. They had questioned staff, interrogated nearby business owners, and chased tips about suspicious vehicles. Yet none of it had brought them closer to the truth. Hale knew repeating those same steps would only waste time. He shifted his focus to something else entirely: the psychology of the suspect. He believed the robbery wasn't only about money. The thief had already proven they had the skill and patience to plan a flawless job. But the choice to strike in daylight, in the busiest part of town, and leave almost no trace spoke to something deeper. This was a statement, a way of showing superiority, as if the thief wanted the world to recognize their brilliance without ever seeing their face. To Hale, this suggested arrogance. Arrogance was dangerous, but it was also exploitable. He studied the way the security system had failed. There were no signs of hacking into the digital network, no interference from outside devices, and no evidence that someone had tampered with the control panels. That left only one possibility: the system had been compromised from within the building itself. But there were no staff members with the technical skills required, and background checks revealed no one with suspicious ties. This was a deliberate trick, one that suggested the thief had physically entered the building in a way nobody expected. While others dismissed the possibility, Hale began mapping out the store's structure and surrounding area. He requested blueprints of not only the jewelry store, but the neighboring shops and the rooftop layouts. He traced possible entry points that wouldn't require smashing doors or breaking locks. What he found was unsettling. A series of maintenance shafts and old ventilation spaces connected the roofs of the block, hidden in plain sight. It would have taken careful planning, but someone could have used those routes to slip inside, bypass security, and vanish before anyone realized what had happened. Hale felt certain he was dealing with someone who valued puzzles as much as he did. This wasn't a brute force criminal. This was a strategist, someone who studied their prey and struck only when they knew the odds were in their favor. For Hale, the path forward was clear. If the suspect treated the heist like a game, then the only way to catch them was to play the same game, only better. What began as a robbery investigation was quickly transforming into a mental duel, and Hale was determined to win. Weeks dragged on without progress, and the city began to wonder if the mysterious thief had truly managed to outwit the entire police force. News outlets replayed the same clips of the jewelry store again and again, speculating about how someone could erase their presence so completely. Some residents whispered about an inside job, while others believed the culprit must have been part of a larger criminal network. For Detective Marcus Hale, those theories felt too ordinary. He knew he was hunting an individual, not a team, someone who thrived on precision and the thrill of beating the system. All he needed was the one mistake that no amount of planning could erase. Late one night, Hale was poring over hours of footage from security cameras that didn't belong to the jewelry store but to surrounding businesses and streetlights. Most detectives had ignored them, convinced that the grainy angles offered nothing of value. But Hale had trained himself to look for patterns, to notice disruptions in the ordinary. After nearly 12 hours of footage, his tired eyes caught something that jolted him awake. On a rooftop across the street from the store, a faint shifting shadow appeared just minutes before the robbery began. At first glance, it seemed meaningless, but the shape of the shadow told a story. The way it bent and stretched against the faint glow of the streetlight indicated that someone had moved across the roof. The figure disappeared just as quickly as it appeared, but it was enough to confirm Hale's suspicion. The entry point had never been the front or back door. The thief had come in from above. The brilliance of the plan wasn't just in bypassing the obvious. It was in choosing a route so unusual that most investigators had not even considered it. With this revelation, Hale dug deeper into city records. He requested permits, blueprints, and renovation plans for the buildings connected to the jewelry store. What he found was a paper trail most people would have overlooked. A few months earlier, a man named Adrian Cross had filed for access to several sets of rooftop blueprints, claiming it was for an independent architecture project. On paper, Adrian was a former architect who had left the profession after a string of failed ventures. Beneath the surface, he had a reputation for conning investors and manipulating clients, with schemes designed to make him look clever at their expense. Adrian had never been caught committing a physical crime, but his history was filled with patterns of arrogance. He liked to create situations where he could prove himself smarter than everyone else, even when money wasn't the main prize. Hale realized he was dealing with a man who valued the game more than the reward. The jewels were important, but the real treasure for Adrian was the feeling of outsmarting Riverton's police and basking in his own hidden genius. The discovery was critical, but it wasn't enough to make an arrest. There was no physical evidence tying Adrian to the robbery, only a trail of suspicious paperwork and a shadow on a rooftop. Still, Hale felt certain he had found his suspect. The next move had to be precise. If Adrian was as clever as he seemed, then confronting him directly would only push him deeper into hiding. The key was to exploit the one weakness Hale had been studying from the beginning: the arrogance that made Adrian believe he was untouchable. Detective Marcus Hale knew that walking straight up to Adrian Cross with handcuffs would be pointless. Without hard evidence, the case would collapse before it ever reached a courtroom. More importantly, Adrian seemed like the kind of man who thrived on the belief that he was 2 steps ahead of everyone else. To beat him, Hale needed to let that arrogance work against him. He began planning something unusual, not a traditional sting operation, but a psychological trap designed to bait Adrian into revealing himself. The strategy started with a calculated leak. Hale contacted a trusted journalist and provided a piece of misinformation. The story claimed investigators had found a fingerprint at the crime scene, faint, partial, and smudged, but enough to narrow down a list of possible suspects. It was a lie, carefully crafted to stir curiosity in the one person Hale knew would pay attention. For an ordinary criminal, such a report might not matter. But Adrian, driven by obsession with control and brilliance, would be unable to resist checking whether the police were truly onto him. After the article ran, Hale instructed his team to maintain absolute silence. No follow-up press releases, no clarifications, no denials. The idea was to let the uncertainty gnaw at Adrian's confidence. Every day, Hale reviewed surveillance footage of places Adrian was known to frequent: libraries, coffee shops, and architectural supply stores. Adrian's behavior seemed unchanged at first, calm and calculated, but Hale understood the psychology of pressure. Even the smartest criminals could be rattled when they feared a small oversight might undo their perfect plan. A week later, the break came. A security guard at the Riverton Police Evidence Facility reported spotting a janitor moving through restricted areas late at night. The man's uniform looked legitimate, but something about his movements seemed off. The guard noted the time and place, and when Hale reviewed the footage, his theory was confirmed. The janitor wasn't a janitor at all. It was Adrian Cross in disguise. He hadn't come to steal anything of value. Instead, he was examining the supposed fingerprint evidence, desperate to see whether it truly existed. Hale had expected this exact move, and he had prepared the facility in advance. He had arranged for the evidence room to be fitted with invisible UV ink sensors on the seals of containers. Anyone who tampered with them would leave glowing traces invisible to the naked eye but obvious under special lights. It was a silent trap, one Adrian could never detect, and it required nothing more than his own curiosity to spring it. When Adrian left the building, officers trailed him discreetly. Hale chose not to arrest him on the spot, preferring to wait until the evidence was undeniable. The following morning, agents visited Adrian's residence under the guise of a routine inquiry. When they scanned his hands, gloves, and even his clothing under UV light, the marks glowed like a signature. Adrian's arrogance had driven him straight into the detective's carefully designed snare. Hale knew then that the final act of this battle was about to unfold, and this time, the suspect would have no way out. The moment the glowing traces appeared under the ultraviolet light, the case shifted from suspicion to certainty. Adrian Cross, the man who had treated the city of Riverton like a chessboard, was now cornered by the very game he thought he had mastered. He tried to maintain his composure, insisting that the glowing marks were some kind of mistake, but Hale knew the evidence spoke louder than any excuse. The marks weren't just proof of tampering. They were the imprint of a mind too confident to imagine failure. For Hale, the victory wasn't in the arrest itself, but in watching Adrian realize that his carefully crafted illusion of control had crumbled. The search of Adrian's home began almost immediately. At first glance, it looked ordinary, tidy, even sterile. But Hale knew to look for the places where arrogance left its mark. In the study, rows of architecture textbooks lined the shelves, their spines worn from years of handling. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Then, with careful inspection, Hale discovered that several volumes were hollowed out from within. Tucked neatly inside were the missing diamonds and gemstones, hidden not in safes or secret vaults, but in plain sight, disguised by the very field Adrian once called his profession. It was a fitting irony, the architect of clever schemes undone by the architecture he believed made him untouchable. The recovery of the jewels stunned the city. Headlines praised the brilliance of the police department, though inside the force, everyone knew the success belonged to Hale's strategy alone. The public marveled at the daring details of the heist and the equally clever trap that brought the culprit down. What fascinated them most was the battle of wits, the duel between a criminal genius and a detective who refused to be intimidated by intellect. Riverton no longer whispered about an unstoppable thief. Instead, they spoke about the detective who outsmarted him. During questioning, Adrian tried to reframe the narrative. He claimed he never intended to keep the diamonds for long, that it was all an experiment to prove the system could be broken. He painted himself not as a thief, but as a visionary who exposed flaws in security and human complacency. Yet, the evidence told a different story. The hollowed books, the forged permits, the disguises, and the elaborate rooftop entry made it clear that Adrian wasn't driven by noble intentions. He was fueled by ego, a need to win at a game only he believed he was playing. When the trial came, the courtroom was packed. Prosecutors presented the evidence with precision, and Hale's testimony left little room for doubt. The defense tried to argue entrapment, suggesting the fake fingerprint story had manipulated Adrian unfairly. But the jury saw through it. They recognized the truth, that Adrian had walked into the trap because he couldn't resist proving himself smarter than everyone else. His downfall wasn't forced, it was chosen. As Adrian was led away in handcuffs, Hale reflected on the case not as a personal triumph, but as proof that even the sharpest minds could be undone by their own vanity. The city of Riverton slowly returned to its calm rhythm, its people reassured that no criminal was beyond reach. For Hale, the case stood as a reminder that intelligence alone was never enough. Strategy, patience, and the ability to see the flaws hidden within brilliance were what truly turned the tide. In the end, the thief had played his game to perfection, until he faced someone who could play it better.